Alright, hey, welcome to This Week in History with Mike and Will. I am Mike.
I'm Will.
And what we do is we look up a date in history, and that matches a week. I could explain that better.
A day this week in history. And
Something
we talk about an event.
And we talk
during
about that
week.
thing. So this,
But not this actual week, like years ago. Right. History.
So Will does the research and explains it to me, and then we have fun. Will has 1 hour to do this. So today we are discussing the first edition of the Daily Courant. Current. Daily Courant.
Anglicanized as current.
All right, and that happened in 1702.
Go. All right. So the first edition of the Daily Current. What is that? First of all, let's talk about what a current is.
Sure.
A current is not like the current of water, and it's not like the current berries. It's spelled very differently. It's courant, and that is a now out of date term for a newspaper.
Oh, the Daily Courant?
I think the first time it was used, like, it wasn't an English word. I think it was Dutch.
Okay.
Because they had newspapers too. But also it means to run. It's running, but like only in heraldry. So like a horse current would be like if it's on a shield and the horse is like running. That's current. A lion current.
Okay.
It's running.
Sure.
And then also it's an English term for gossip. Oh. I'm not sure if the term for gossip predates when they started printing it, or if it's after they started making these and then it became like a common term.
Oh, so they don't know if it was named because
it's gossip, or right. Because before this first edition of the Daily Courant in London, there were currents elsewhere. There was the Dutch current. There was like the Antwerp current.
So that's important to know. We are in London.
We're in London. Okay. Yes. And so
1702.
The Daily Courant was founded by a woman.
What?
A woman. How?
They allowed women to read and write and publish a daily thing?
Ish. Her name was Elizabeth Mallet. Now, unfortunately, all they have is for her dates anywhere that I've looked. And I looked all over the place. Not just Wikipedia, folks. I tried to check.
He also searched Bing.
I checked Bing. I Googled it. But no, I was looking through all these things, and I could not find a birth date or a death date. For all I know, she was never born, and she never died. She just was.
Sure.
But sometimes they list...
Seems unlikely.
Yes, it seems very unlikely. But sometimes when people don't know those details, they just say flourished. It's FL period. This date to this date.
Oh, is that what that means?
Flourished from 1672 to 1706. So for 34 years, she was historically relevant.
Oh, okay. So that may not be when she was born or died, but
she was... because we know she was married in like 1672.
Okay.
So she was more than, we hope, like 16 or 18. In England at the time, it was not fashionable to marry children.
Yeah.
And she was married to a man named David Mallet. We don't even know her original name.
Oh.
So she could have just been Elizabeth, no surname.
Right.
But she married David Mallet, and he and she owned a printing press together.
Now, the printing press was recently invented in...
Germany. I probably should have written that one down. But I have... Because it's not when you think. So the original, I have a history of printing written down.
Okay, that's fine. I don't know.
But there's the Gutenberg press.
That was the one I was.
That's the one you're thinking of. Is in Germany, and I can look that up really fast just because we want to know that. That's important.
Sure.
The Gutenberg press, though, was invented by Johannes Gutenberg
shortly before the Police Academy movies.
Right before the. Oh wow, that's much older than I thought. His press, because he was alive in 1400 to 1468.
All right.
So he made a printing press. He had a wooden printing press, and it was the screws. So his press was really efficient. Okay. And what it was you'd have a board. I'm going to try to hold my hand up so people could see it in the video. A board here and a board here. And then you'd put a piece of paper here, and there'd be some ink and on this piece up here, and there was a screw on top.
Oh,
and as it tightened down, it would go... And then you lift it up, and then print it.
One sheet of paper.
Now, at that time, they used wood blocks for this, and each page was hand-carved into a singular piece of wood.
Wow.
This was obviously like a lot of work.
Yeah,
very labor-intensive, and you could do it once. Like one time, one page.
Yeah.
If you made a mistake on it, you had to chisel it out, maybe start over.
So it's probably easier to do art than to do words.
Yeah, and that's what originally it was for. So the concept of printing, so we'll sidebar what's going on with the Daily Current,
Yes.
so we can understand how printing works.
Yeah.
That's important.
It's good to know.
The first that we know of concept of printing, using another object to lay ink or color or text onto something else, goes back to 3500 BC.
Bwah.
And it was done by the Sumerians. Sumerians do all kinds of stuff. Not Cimmerians, that's Conan. They crush their enemies, see them driven before them, and hear the lamentation of the women, but they don't worry about printing presses. Okay, so this also fantasy novel.
Got it.
Sumerians. Ancient Sumeria, which is like the Middle East. It's in the Middle East. It was an old school kingdom. I think it's where like modern day Iraq is. It's kind of like that whole Babylon region. Also called the cradle of civilization because they did a lot of stuff there.
Yeah. You ever been there?
Yeah, once.
Me too.
Don't recommend it under the circumstances I was in, but before that, it was very lovely. Yeah. It was...
The place I was in, I don't know if this is standard anywhere in there, but we were walking around some sort of thing, and we were walking on like shards of pottery.
That sounds about right.
It was like, what is this? I don't know, just a lot of old pottery.
We hope it's not that old. Yeah.
It just seemed scattered around everywhere. There's like, I guess we're just...
They use a lot of ceramic, like, shelling around things to make it look pretty. And then when a certain country shelled the heck out of Iraq, a lot of that broke off and then was broken down. We almost blew up Babylon because Saddam Hussein was unearthing Babylon at the time, and that was cool. That was like the one cool thing he did.
Yeah,
he murdered his people and he was a monster, but he unearthed Babylon. That's pretty neat.
I feel like that's where I was.
We almost blew it up.
Well,
and yeah, that wasn't great.
That has nothing to do with today.
Nothing to do with today.
And that was for sure just straight up just for freedom and nothing else. Moving on.
Yeah.
This show is not about political judgments one way or another.
We'll make another show about politics.
We're just viewing history and learning about it.
History through a lens. That's what happened. We blew stuff up. I'm not saying whether... Yep. Moving right along. So Sumeria, they had cylinders that had things etched on them, like the royal seal, and they just kind of roll it onto things.
Yeah.
I think. But you had mentioned once before you bet that China started printing presses.
You are correct. I am correct. Good.
You are correct. Whew. The earliest use of a press to do anything that people have found was at least in 220 A.D. And that was in China, and they used it to press patterns into silk. Oh. So what they do is they'd carve what they wanted in the design, and then they'd put a piece of silk in between the two parts of the press, squeeze it down, and then add ink.
Oh.
So if you've seen those stand-up like tapestries that are beautiful silk with mountains, and there's some words in it, and it's water here and it's green there, and it's kind of washed through. That's what they typically use for that, and it's still used today as a technique to press silk.
Silk pressing.
Silk pressing.
Different than silk screening, which is old on that thing.
Yes.
Just saying.
Yeah. But they probably used that to make silk screens.
Sure.
All kinds of stuff. Yeah. And eventually, some clever person realized in the 7th century during the Tang Dynasty that they could use this to put like mandates on it and keep records of all the stuff the empire was doing.
The Tang Dynasty?
The Tang Dynasty. T-A-N-G. Tangs. Might be pronounced
delicious.
Tang. It's hard to pronounce Chinese words for me because Chinese uses a very specific set of tones, and one word can mean like 6 things depending on the tone you use for it. So I never want to get it wrong, so I just Anglicanize it to the point where it's unrecognizable.
You're wrong either way.
I'm wrong no matter what I do, but I can't cause offense because I won't say like the wrong word. They're just like, that's wrong, but it's not like the offensive version of that word.
Okay.
You just are wrong, and that's okay. I mean, it's not, but it's less bad.
Well, I mean, we don't hear. There are some sounds we just don't hear.
And when you don't hear it for your whole life or practice it actively, Chinese is a very complex old language, and there's 2 of them, so it gets even more complex. Anyway, so the Chinese did that, and they used like a block to make these things. They also have the oldest book That was
oldest book.
the oldest book known to be printed, like with a press, was in 868 on the 11th of May, and it was the Chinese Buddhist Diamond Sutra. And that is it's the oldest book known with like a specific printing date.
Diamond Sutra?
The Diamond Sutra. So there are books that might be older, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of those things are written older. But as far as like a printing block and then having a publication date, that's the oldest one that has been found so far. Huh. There might be older, but I thought that was really cool.
What was that one about?
It's the Diamond Sutra. So it's about Buddhism has different sutras, different poems, different stories behind it. I didn't dig into the Diamond Sutra. I probably should have.
Yeah, man. Some other time.
Another day. Now, maybe we'll come back to that on the 11th of May.
Maybe. I'll make
a little note.
I've only heard of the Karma Sutra, which
that is very different.
It's got the word sutra.
It does have a word sutra.
Not that different.
Sutra, I think, just typically means like a book.
Okay.
Typically based on philosophy. But yeah, the Kama Sutra is there's some philosophy there.
That's a sutra I'm interested in.
Yeah. Then later on, we had movable type, also invented by the Chinese, in the 11th century by a fellow named Bi Sheng. Now, Bi Sheng, B-I, Sheng, S-H-E-N-G, also called P Sheng. Not sure what the big difference is. And the I has a little over it. Little
accent mark?
Little accent mark going backwards. Nope. Not sure what that makes it sound like instead, but for us English speakers, it's supposed to help.
Okay.
So Bi Sheng was an artisan. He was an inventor. He created a bunch of different things, but he invented this concept of it seems very complicated when I was reading about it, but he took like basically some kind of resin composite to hold everything in place. And then he took individual tiles made out of clay, and he carved the characters in it. And they said it was no wider than the edge of a coin. So it was very thin. Oh. And he did this all by hand. And because Chinese characters are not letters, they're words or phrases sometimes.
Sure.
He had to make a lot of these things.
Yeah.
And then he would have enough where if it was a common character, he could have like 20 per page. And if it was less common, he still had several of them. He kept everything in boxes and labeled with paper to keep it all sorted. And what he'd do is he'd lay it out on this resin, and then he'd press them in, and then he'd squish it down so that everything was nice and flat. The description used by a contemporary at the time was as smooth and flat as a whetstone. So he wanted nice and even.
Yeah.
And it's like a wheel. It's kind of set up like a wheel. It's very circular. Huh. I don't know why. Maybe so he can just keep rotating it. They have an actual version of this built in China to show.
So the letters are on the wheel?
Yeah, they're on the plate, like on the ground here, and I think it just rotates, and that's how he squishes it.
Interesting.
I'd have to double check all the mechanisms.
Sure.
Very interesting. And then you put some ink over it, and then you put your paper down, and that's how you do it.
Where do they get ink from?
Oh, ink can come from, a lot of the time it's used with ash.
Oh,
and like water.
Yeah, okay.
You could mix in other things to help it stand. I think what they talked about was they used pine, ash, and water to kind of mix it all together and have it stuck together. It depends if you want colored ink, and you start adding pigments to it from dried up flowers. There are certain plants that just have a really good blackness to them when they're crushed and have water added. So there's different types of ink. There's cheaper stuff, and then sometimes you use lead in it, which, kills people, but they didn't know that back then.
It doesn't kill them quick enough.
Yeah, it's slow death by years. So you really wanted somebody to die back then, you get them in the printing trade. That's long con. Like, I don't like this guy. I'm going to make him a printing apprentice. He'll die in 20 years.
Hope he doesn't read any of the books warning about this.
We'll send those to a different printer.
Perfect plan.
He can't read. He just knows how to run the press. He's a big guy.
I'm going to look up modern ink because I want to learn about modern ink.
It's a fascinating subject. My older brother is a big ink guy. He likes calligraphy and all these drawing stuff. You'll find like the more artistic people that start using pens, there's a huge variety of what they use nowadays, and then what they used to use varies by region. You know, something might be like, oh, this rock makes really good black. Charcoal is real common too. You melt that down, add it, or not melt it down, but grind it down, add water. That's a good base. There's lots of stuff that works for it.
Okay.
So anyway, he invented this Bishing fellow in the 11th century. He created this. And
good job, B.
Good job, dude. Like, it became very common throughout Asia, specifically in China, Korea, and Japan. It was a big deal.
No, when they made the movable pieces, they hand carved them. Were they able to make copies of that?
Yeah, because you could cast it, and then you could do it again.
Okay, good.
And then other inventors kind of took his idea, and they improved on it within years. His contemporary who said that about him was like, this is cool, but I feel like we could make it last longer if we used wood instead of clay. And then a wealthy guy, like 300 years later, made it in bronze because he had the money for bronze.
Sure.
It's like, I love this idea, but if we made it out of bronze, then it's never going to go bad.
I wonder how many inventions we go through in history where some smart guy did a thing. Then a number of years later, a guy with money made the thing easier.
Who was smart enough to know, this is good.
Go take this
but
guy's
it could
idea.
be better. I'm going to take it. Yep.
Sure.
And, fortunately, like, a lot of the people... What's interesting about this, to me, is that this guy was a nobody. He wasn't a person at court. He wasn't...
Just a guy with a knife and a dream.
He just had an idea. And the empire was like, ooh, we use that.
That's a good idea.
It was like one of the, the courtiers of the empire was wandering around. I was like, oh, that's pretty good. We could use that.
Sure.
Keep track of everything the emperor says, even if it's stupid.
No, for whatever your reason, it is a good idea.
Writing it by hand. But then you can pass out, like, all this information to, you can mass produce a letter instead of having 20 people copy it. You just make 200 of it.
Sure.
In 5 seconds, it's done.
Of course, then you have to teach people how to read.
Well, China was a pretty literate society back
Okay.
then. So, it still are. I believe they have a very high literacy rate. It's very important. Because the language is so darn complicated, you got to learn it.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's how they invented mobile type. Now, in Europe, that took a lot longer to catch on. Movable type was not the thing. Even into, like, the 1600s, it wasn't really common. It was wood blocks. That was just easier for them. But eventually what they used was movable type, and it was, like, heavy chunks of iron, basically.
Yeah.
Kind of, it looks like if you just cut the ends off the little arms of a typewriter.
Yeah. I've seen those. I can picture that. I've seen those things.
Sometimes they started to put words together, like the common words, like the.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sure.
Like, they just had that. And then they last forever. They don't wear down if they're iron. It's because it's just paper.
Boom.
If it's wood, that can wear down. So we have some of these old wood blocks that they would use for these things, but they wear down over time. So there's no way of knowing who the original artist is when they were first made, because as they wear down, you just carve them back out.
Oh, okay.
Thick blocks.
Oh, sure.
Really big blocks. And they get all kinds of colors in them and inks in them, so they're ancient, beaten up things a lot of the time. And it might look totally different than it originally was. This was a dragon.
Things,
and now it's a sheep.
Oh.
So it got very rounded.
Sad.
It's just a sad...
What a sad turn of events for that dragon.
Sad devolution. Fiercest creature in mythology and puffy cute sheep. Doesn't even look right.
Nah.
But so that was kind of the foundation of all these things. And then the first newspapers started in Venice.
In Venice.
The concept of the newspaper... So the Venetians were big traders.
Sure,
right? They're a mercantile empire.
All that
it was
water.
Very famous. Yeah, they were surrounded by water. They're in a lagoon. They're on a little island. They had to go somewhere.
Little paper boy on his little gondola.
Yep.
Hey, it's a paper. Throw the paper. I paddle down to the next one.
I come into the next villa. It's also how the paper airplane was invented.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. Whoops. Sorry.
It's stylish.
I threw your paper in the
canal.
Good canal.
Look at this. They had contests.
Sure.
Those were the best.
Look
the worst guys just made balls of paper and meh, here's your paper.
Look up the history of paper delivery. Paper boys. I'm gonna say paper boys, even though girls can deliver papers too.
Yes.
I was a paper boy.
Yeah. My brother was. I didn't. I didn't do that.
I had 2 paper routes in the morning. I wake up at like 5 in the morning.
Yeah. Hardcore.
I don't do that anymore.
No,
Screw that.
I'm not getting up that early.
No one's delivering papers anymore either.
I am convinced that time of day isn't a thing.
Oh yeah, nothing good. Nothing good happens.
There's
at 5
nothing going on 5 a.m. I'm either going to bed then because I had a long night, or and all these people who get up early and are watching this are like, these guys.
Yeah.
Wake up later, man.
It's okay. People get up early, get to decide everything else. So.
Yes.
It's fine.
Yeah,
I can.
I can choose to not enjoy that. When I was in
That's
the
right.
Army, we got up at like 4 or 5 sometimes, and it still sucked. That didn't make it better. It still just sucked. Ah, yes, you've endured hardship. Good job.
Well, we could discuss time schedules later.
Time schedules. We're going
I
to.
have a lot.
We have to talk about time schedules here. This
one.
actually has to do with time.
Oh, okay, good.
So the earliest concept of like newspapers were just little leaflets that people handed out in Venice, that were like, here's what's going on in trade. Here's kind of some relevant stuff that's happening in the rest of the world.
Business things, probably.
Usually business things, because there was a huge level of censorship.
Oh.
You cannot say like, well, the Duke was an idiot and did this.
Oh.
Then the Duke drags you out of your home and has you beaten in public.
I wonder how quickly they figured out we should probably censor this stuff. Like right away?
Really fast. Really fast. Probably before it even happened. The second that printing happened, they went,
I could misuse this. Oh, we should probably.
Oh, no. Yes.
Interesting.
Like, Machiavelli comes in. He's like, just so you know, I have an idea. Oh, God, no.
Oh, God, that idea.
This is a terrible idea. And, books have been printed by this time. It just, the idea of this passing around news. So Venice has been doing this for, like, a while. Since, like, the 1400s, but it was handwritten stuff. So the first, like, early kind of concept of the newspaper was actually the French court.
Oh. Okay.
And it was wealthy courtiers who kind of said, here's what's going on in the world around us, and we will tell everyone how we feel about it, and this is what
Don't you want to know what's going on in the court?
Would you like to know? Pass this on. The king said this funny joke at the expense of the Germans.
We are doing very important things
We are
here.
very fancy French people, and
Please do not have a revolution.
We want the world to know how fancy we are, so here you go. And it was in like 1555 or something that they started doing this. So they would say, this was what's going on in our neighbor lands. This is what the court's kind of doing. It was never critical. No. It was never like, the king, he fell down and hurt his butt. It was hilarious. Why is my head being chopped off?
Oh, jeez, yeah.
Don't like this at all. And this is, of course, before, like, the later French kings with the giant hair and the heart-shaped mole on the face and all the makeup. They're still, like, coming out of being the warrior caste type people. Less, this is...
Frou-frou and more...
Yes, more, I'll still stab you.
Yeah, okay.
I think at this time, this is like either right before or right around the time of King Charles, who was a warrior king, and one of the last warrior kings, who, like, fought the Borgia popes. Like, he was this ugly little man who was a military genius of his time. He was a fascinating character. But yeah, he was just like, everyone thinks I'm ugly and misshapen, so they just assume I can't do any of this stuff, and maybe I can't fight, but I know exactly how to destroy everybody.
Ooh.
He was really good at it. So you didn't want to make that king mad. He also made France look really good. Warrior king. That's great.
People like that.
People who are nationalists love when their country slaughters other countries and wins. That's great.
Well, winning's the key part, I guess.
Winning's the key. You can't just lose. It's like Peter the Great was great in Russia because he was great at conquering, and then his son, not so great, because he sucked at conquering.
Peter the not so
great. He was the Peter the overthrown. So that's what happens.
Okay.
But anyway, the French had passed out this Gazette, the Gazette. And
sounds like a French word.
And it is a French word. And it caught on, and the concept was interesting. So the Germans, being German, kind of took it, and they made it a little more efficient, and they started producing a weekly newspaper.
Well, I want to make a leap on Gazette. Now I'm thinking, gaz, maybe a root of gaze, and et seems...
Oh yeah, something to look at. Look at this thing. Maybe.
Yeah, and
we could look up the etymology of Gazette.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's my guess.
And then there's the Mail Gazette. It's the male gaze.
Gazelle.
It just leers at you the whole time you're looking at it. Like, ah.
Gazelle.
Gazelle. I don't know French.
I don't either. I don't-
French people, explain to us.
That seems either feminine or like small.
Mm-hmm. Zet.
Yeah.
Little paper.
Yeah.
Maybe. Little thing to look at.
Take a little look.
We could also be totally wrong.
Could be.
It's like a gazelle, but smaller.
I hope this
It's
video
running.
gets the most comments.
I hope so too. We are trying to get as many comments as possible.
Yeah.
The Germans kind of took this concept of what the French were doing, where they're kind of talking about what's going on in the court, and they took what the Venetians were doing, where it was, here's what's going on in trade, and they said, well, here's what's going on in all the things, and we'll keep people kind of updated.
Plus a comics section.
And maybe comics, and
Probably not the Germans.
Probably not the Germans. The Germans don't have a sense of humor. They don't have a sense of humor that we have.
What is this cat who does not like Mondays?
Yeah. Why don't you like Mondays?
Ha ha ha.
It's just a day. What's his thing with lasagna? Why does the cat like lasagna?
No more comics now.
This Beetle Bailey. He's
No
the
more.
first soldier ever. How did they beat us in World War II? Just incompetence. Lazy.
You look up some German newspaper comics.
They are-
But like, I got a lot of research to do after this.
Yeah, you do. They're just not funny, though, I bet. If you don't have a sense of humor that we have.
Is that that mouse? It's a...
Mouse is not funny. That's a book about the Holocaust.
It is German.
It is German. It's like, this is the closest we get to humor. Look at
Look at
the tragedy and misery happening to these mice. It's not funny.
But it is mice.
But it's mice, so it's cute.
It's a little funny.
It's a little funny.
Get it?
You'd have to be there. But you wouldn't want to be. So anyway, moving on about the Germans not having a sense of humor.
Yes.
Because then we're going to get attacked by the Germans now in the comments section. Bring it on, Germany. We look forward to your comments. Tell us German jokes.
Oh,
That'd be
that,
cool.
sure. That'd be a great idea.
They probably have lots of cool jokes, so let's hear them. I like cultural jokes. Those are fun. Like, oh, I never thought of that as funny. Excellent. So anyway, their first newspaper, oh, I'm going to butcher this, was the Relation aller Vernehmen und Gedenkwürdigen Historien.
That's all one word?
No, but Gedenkwürdigen or Verdigen is one word. Gedenkwürdigen.
Right. I'm not going to bother writing that down now.
It's by Johann Carolus in 1605.
Okay.
And what that actually means is account of all distinguished and commemorable stories. It's recognized by the World Association of Newspapers as the first newspaper. This is the first one.
The German one.
This is the first one.
Right.
This is the first one because when it was weekly.
Germans name things the way I sometimes name things I create, where I just list off everything it's about.
What's it about?
In
Yep.
the title. That's
It's
not
not
too long.
shorthand. It's not shorthand. It's like, this is the story that's about this, that's
Yeah.
that.
What's like the German word for it's a really long one? It's like
They're all
is it,
pretty long.
is there a very long for tank or I thought tank was a really long one.
Oh, yeah, there's like
Just, yeah.
there's the Panzerwagen.
Yeah.
Panzerkampfwagen, I think, is the
Something.
tank.
There's some really long.
A lot of their words are long because it's very descriptive. This is what it does exactly. Word. So at least if you speak German, you know exactly what's going on in German all the time. Like, it's just very, very clear. There's no room for error. This is what this means.
Very organized.
It's very organized. Very organized. Everything is nicely organized here in this country. Anyone who's disorganized, go away.
What are all these mice doing here?
God, Mike.
What? Well, are you worried about angering the Nazis? Is
No, I don't. I want to anger them.
All right.
That's the one group of people I will
Good.
never, ever, ever care about.
Let's see if we can drum up amongst our 6 viewers and figure out which one's the Nazi.
Yeah. Only the Nazi will be affected.
Comment if you're
The
the Nazi.
downvote comes from the Nazi, and we'll find out who you are, and we'll unfriend you. Or whatever. Or maybe the Nazis will get mad, and then this video will get famous for being anti-Nazi,
Maybe.
and then it'll flip around, and then we get more subscribers. Yeah! All right. It sounds like I don't have a lot to talk about, but I do. Where's my time? I'm like half done. All right.
You're about halfway done.
I'm about halfway done. So this first newspaper kind of set this idea of people wanted more information more frequently, and people were becoming more literate because of the printing press.
The German one.
The German one.
Yes.
And so this idea caught on pretty fast.
Yeah.
This first one was created in 1605, and within like the next 100 years, there are tons of them. There's like 100 newspapers across Europe.
Wow. Okay.
But they're weekly. And they are still very heavily censored.
Mm-hmm.
They typically talk about other countries,
Okay.
not local stuff.
So now, is there a business now? Now there's like people who actually now are making
printers start making these and selling them.
Selling them and distributing them?
Yeah, it was a great concept of you bought a printing press. Well, then you could print anything. People come to you and say, hey, I have this book. Okay, well, it's going to cost you this. This is what it costs for the ink. This is what it costs for the paper, the binding, and everything else.
Yeah.
And we'll print it for you. And here's our plans for it. And it'll cost you this much to do the thing. We can also sell it. A lot of the time, these places also were like the back room of a bookstore.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So you print it, and then you sell it.
Hot
You
off
cut
the
out a
presses.
middleman.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's exactly where the term "the press" comes from. Is the printing press. Squish.
Pressed.
Like a knowledge sandwich.
Like a knowledge sandwich.
Just 2 pieces of bread and the meat in the middle. That's
That's
your
right.
information. Press.
Good thing they didn't call it the knowledge sandwich.
This is the associated knowledge sandwich. meet the knowledge sandwich. That's not going to be. Yeah, that doesn't translate well. He had a knowledge sandwich conference.
Sure.
Now I'm going to do that. That's my new. That's going to be a new vernacular for us. Knowledge sandwich. Press is much easier, but not as fun. And now I'm hungry for knowledge,
Sure.
but also ham. Like a good ham sandwich. Sorry, piggies. So this idea spreads around, and eventually people start to think, what if we made it not weekly?
Whoa.
So this Elizabeth Mallet lady, her start was with her husband. They owned a press together. They sold books, but what their main thing actually was they took down like the last speeches of people that were being executed, like condemned criminals. It was very common for people to want to know what they thought before they passed. Did they show contrition? Were they monsters? Did they have a cool like self-eulogy?
Did they mention me?
Did they talk about me? Did they name the victims and maybe I find out what happened to my lost family member? Did this kind of thing? Were they a traitor and they're like, go France! Ugh, England sucks.
Yeah.
So they would write these things down.
I want to know.
And then they'd print them and then they'd sell them. And people bought them. This is a very common thing.
Great.
They wanted to know what these guys were thinking.
I'd buy it.
And it was almost exclusively men being executed, just because.
Because men do things that deserve execution.
We're typically the ones that are murderers. There are a few women murderers, but for the most part, if it's murder, if it's rape, if it's the bad ones, guys. Not all men.
Sure.
But predominantly people who break the laws like that, guys.
Yeah.
Throughout history, too. All wars fought by men, pretty much. Just saying. You find like 5 women in war, and you're like, oh, she was awesome.
I'm gonna look that up.
Yeah, you can check my notes.
Amazon research Amazon women.
The myth of the Amazon women.
All right.
But anyway, so they start by selling these, and eventually David Mallet, husband, passes away. So the wife inherits kind of the whole thing, and she immediately apprentices her son, also named David. They weren't good with names, apparently.
Well, not many back then.
No, most people like Junior gets named Dad's name.
Sure.
Fine. So Junior, within 10 years, he's shown that he's really not good at this.
Oh.
And so Elizabeth takes over the business. She's like, fine, you suck at this. I love you, son, but you're terrible at this.
Gave you a chance, kid.
You're terrible at this, so I'm going to run this whole thing.
Okay.
Well, she runs that press. They have a bookstore. They're adjacent to a tavern, so I think this is a great location. You don't have television. You only have books and printed information. So you find the guy who's literate and good at reading stuff, and he goes in and he buys the spreadsheets or the last will and testament of this guy who died, or this book, and he goes to the tavern and you pay him a couple pennies and he reads it out loud. Great entertainment, right? At least I think so. That'd be a great way to get your news. Everybody throw in
sure.
a penny so this guy can go buy the book, and then he comes back and he tells us what's going on.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And that was a really common thing. Otherwise, most stuff was word of mouth because literacy was not great. But it's becoming good again as of the Renaissance.
Well, it's easier to learn to read when you have things to read.
Exactly. Because up until the Renaissance, there's kind of not a lot of books. Not a lot of written stuff. There was the Bible, but peasants weren't allowed to read it.
Sure. It's like I don't know how to do a spacewalk.
That's a really good example because we don't have an opportunity to do that.
Sure.
Jeff Bezos, if you're offering, we're willing to learn.
Yeah, give it a shot.
I'd do that. That'd be cool. Cool.
I'd be real nervous through liftoff, though.
Yeah, that's the thing. Put me in a spacesuit, put me outside the thing. I'm fine. I trust that thing. It's the launching with the explosion under me.
The landing, too.
And then the landing, I'd be... So maybe not. Can we just teleport and be there?
Not yet. I'd still do it.
I'd do it. I'd do it if you did it. We could do it together. It'd be fun. All right. Anyway. We're sidetracking so bad today. We're going to get this done. So Elizabeth takes over the printing presses.
Yes.
And she's determined, you know what? It'd be nice to know what's going on now. Like today.
Yeah, all right.
What happened today. So the one thing she really wanted to do was to pass out this information. So she starts writing, assumes a man's name, because otherwise there's no credibility.
Well done, Elizabeth.
Good job.
Good thinking.
She's smart. Because, people just dismissed it. Oh, it's a woman. I mean, some places weren't as bad. Like, the French court was like, oh, a woman with an idea. How interesting. But England is still very much... Women. Tighten your corset and wear a bigger bonnet so you can't move so well. And shush. That was the thing.
Shush.
So she's writing these things, and she decides, I'm going to make this a daily thing. I'm going to make a daily paper, and then it's only one-sided, or two-sided, but one side has information of what's going on during the day, and then the back is all advertisements, and that's how she paid for things, but also got people to go and try local businesses. And it worked really well.
Yeah, that's great.
The one thing
Good job, Elizabeth.
She's smart. The one thing she never reported on was anything that happened in London itself. Because if you report on London, that's where the crown is. And that's where censorship happens. So she was reporting on what was happening like immediately around it and nationally and all this other information. And she's in Fleet Street, which is London.
Yeah.
It's downtown London, which is also where Sweeney Todd did his throat slitting, was Fleet Street.
Allegedly.
No.
I don't want to sidetrack you anymore.
Sidetrack me anymore. Thank you. But it's a busy street. Lots of businesses and stuff. There's taverns and shops.
Yeah.
And London is a huge place. So she tried to avoid talking specifically about London-only issues because, A, they're really easy to contradict.
Okay.
I don't know if that means, like, she was hoping to tell lies. Like, I don't want to be contradicted, like, that's not what I heard. But that's possibly part of it, too, is, oh, no, that's not what I saw, that's not what I heard. And she's like, well, no, this is what's going on. This is the thing. You can contradict it all you want, but that's not necessarily true. Or she would gather enough information from what was going on around and say, this is what happened in this shire, in this county, in this town. This is what's going on over in France. This is what's going on in Germany. This is what's going on in Italy. Here's an interesting thing that happened, and this is cool. And
now, where is she getting this information from?
She probably had a network of people. Like, again, a lot of these people had to, as a printer especially, she has to engage with people who are bringing her stuff to print. So she's got a network of, it could be as simple as other, like, barkeeps. Barkeeps are a great way of gathering information. Travelers come in, tavern owners and innkeepers.
So she's both printer and editor.
She is. She's considered the very first editor of a newspaper.
A woman?
A woman? Yes. She's considered to be possibly at least recorded, she's the first editor, but that wasn't the term they used then.
Right.
But she's the very first editor of a newspaper because she took in all this information and then concisely put it out on paper, and she refused to ever add an opinion. Oh. Ever. There was never an opinion piece. And she said that she believed the reader had sense enough to make reflections for themselves.
Well.
A lot of faith in humanity there. But
it's 1702?
Yeah. Imagine that the press not having an opinion, which is why, like nowadays, our modern presses, there's like two that just say, here's what's going on. Like the Associated Press, I think, is the only one, maybe Reuters occasionally, where it's just like, this is what happened. And then they put the news down, and then they run away. And then everybody else of the bigger companies, whether it's Fox or CNN or MSNBC, or I don't even know all of them, just a lot of them. They're like, per the Associated Press, this is what happened, which is the laziest reporting I've ever heard, because it's like, well, a guy who's actually a better reporter, or this woman who's embedded in this area.
Well, but on the other hand, why bother?
Why bother trying to get the story when somebody
reporting? Or that is getting information.
Exactly. But now they put, their own spin on it. They'll say, a lot of the time it's editorialized to heck.
That's where the problem is.
And that's the problem. You're not supposed to do that. So that was a huge thing too, was don't editorialize, don't give my opinion. So here's what happened. This tax was increased here. This is what trade happened here. This is the event, this war is brewing here. This is what this guy said. This is, and not saying, well, this is what we think about that. Yeah. This is what this says. And you interpret what that means.
We report, you decide.
Exactly. And that's the basis of the concept behind the press after that. I feel like Cronkite probably said that. We report, you decide.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to pass on information. That's really what the press is supposed to be all about, is here's information, and the separation between the press and just people talking is that.
Yeah.
This is the sanctity of information versus opinion piece. And that was paramount to what she did. It is very fascinating.
Good job, Elizabeth.
Now, she didn't do it for a super long time.
Bad job, Elizabeth.
Bad job, Elizabeth. Because she got older.
Well, that's her fault.
That's her fault. So she started this in 1702. She actually only kept it running for 40 days.
Whoa.
40 days.
Well.
But she did 40 days of reporting, and then she sold it at a lot of money, we're to assume, to a guy who continued it.
Okay.
So it wasn't that it died. It's just, it was probably a lot for her to do that. And then run all the other printing stuff that she was doing, and then she has a family to look after, and all these other things pile up and pile up and pile up.
The husband's dead.
Difficult. The husband's dead. She's a widow.
The son is no good at the job.
The son is no good at the job. This is a country song.
Yeah.
This is
Elizabeth Mallet.
Lizzie Mallet wrote a paper because her husband was dead.
Song's writing itself.
I mean, yeah, the best ones do. So she's moves on from this. Now, she stays relevant because she still prints other stuff.
Okay.
She
continues to flourish.
She continues to flourish. She was a big serial publication, so stuff that was made a lot, but not necessarily at a consistent weekly or maybe monthly.
Okay.
One of them was called The State of Europe. So that was in 1701 when she started that. And that was kind of here's what's going on.
Yeah.
So she had contacts telling her what was going on. She had information about what's happening abroad, what's happening locally. So she built that up, and she apparently had enough of a network where she could say, well, I can do this every day now. I have enough information coming in fresh every day with letters and correspondence that I can say this is what's going on.
That's great.
That's pretty awesome. Now, It wouldn't necessarily be like how we're doing the This Week in History. It might be month-old news because it traveled from so far away.
Oh, sure.
But this is new information for right now. And people ate that up.
Yeah.
Like, immediately thought, this is a great idea. Which is probably why she was bought out. Because the person who bought out her shop had a much bigger setup.
Okay.
And his name, let's see if I can find it. Samuel Buckley.
Samuel Buckley.
He bought it and merged it with what was called the Daily Gazetteer. Or Gazetteer, right? Gazetteer?
No.
It sounds like it's a tier in Gaza.
Okay.
And I don't like that.
But it's like Gazette.
It's like a Gazette. Yeah, it was the
Gazetteer.
people who write the Gazette. And this thing lasted until 1797.
Oh.
So it didn't keep the same name. It kept basically merging and either buying up or being bought out or shifting names over the course of decades. I think like 6 times it changed names. I didn't write them all down because a lot of them are basically like, they called it the Daily. Eventually they just called it the Gazette.
Okay.
The Daily London News. stuff like that. And
Yeah.
they've brought in all this information. And eventually it went from like a one-page thing to being several pages.
More news.
For more news, more information, and
people.
more resources.
Yeah.
And then that was possibly bought out. I couldn't find the details on why the Gazetteer went away.
Okay.
But it lasted for nearly 100 years, this concept of daily news. And then by then, this is just how the world works now. Now we just have daily news all over the place.
Yeah.
Before this, we maybe had weekly news. And Europe was the big driver of this, because the rest of the world is like getting its information, and they're fine with it. But the Europeans are like, because there's so much war going on, probably, there's so much conflict that they need more constant information. There's all these little countries packed in there.
You think they needed more information, or
There's
the more you get information, the more you realize you can get more information?
You're like a junkie for it, right? And then the demand kicks in.
Yeah.
And so now they have this way of doing it, and there's this huge demand.
Yeah.
I want more information. Look at all this cool stuff. I found out all this stuff. I want all this stuff. Give me.
Yeah. But you probably don't need it.
Don't necessarily need it. What this winds up doing, though, is it creates a sense of time that people didn't have before. There are historians that have attributed this to Elizabeth Mallet, that she switched how many people perceive time. Whereas time was always kind of just thought as this, it's in God's hands.
Okay.
And whatever happens, happens. Now it's we are adrift in the sea of time, and it's ticking. Like, you went from having kind of just a general chill flow of stuff.
Well,
day.
I assume you know the seasons. Like we got the seasons.
Yeah, it wasn't like they didn't have clocks or they keep track of the days or anything. But now you have news that's happening every day. The world is moving every day. Every minute, something else is happening. It's not just your little world.
I'm suddenly not as proud of this Elizabeth Mallet person.
It's kind of interesting because it changed this idea of what happens in your world is all that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, it can be, but you also don't have to care.
Mm-hmm.
And now with this concept of daily news, a lot of people started to go, the future changes. It can change on a dime at any minute because of an innovation, because of an idea, because of the words of a king.
Sure.
Because of anything. I want to know about it. I want to know. And this doesn't get any better over time. It evolves, and most of the time it's for a good couple of centuries. This is really cool. This is information, and it's a lot of it, and you're finding out about things that you didn't even know about. You start learning about China when you're in England. You start hearing about what's going on in the new world for the Europeans. It lets the fledgling American colonies share information with each other and learn about what the British are doing. It allows people like John Adams to say, this is not cool, and I would like to talk about it, but I don't have a sounding board large enough, so I'm going to talk to my buddy Ben Franklin, who's friends with literally every editor in the United States, and I would like to print this. Or you get Sam Adams to talk, or Thomas Paine, who wrote one of the most famous propaganda pieces of all time, Common Sense.
Propaganda piece?
Oh, it's a propaganda piece. In Common Sense, he refers to the fact that America has more resources than the entire British Empire. He says, we have more people. We have more money. We have more weapons. And it just makes common sense that we should leave. It's not true. The population density of the United States was much smaller than Britain. And the only reason Britain didn't just steamroll the U.S. before it became a country was because they were fighting all over the world. And specifically with the other global superpower of the time was France.
Sure.
So Britain just couldn't really focus. But yeah, Common Sense is actually a pretty solid propaganda piece. It worked. It worked really well, but that's what propaganda's for. Look at how great we are. Just leave. It's stupid. He did raise some good points, but there's things in it like, our military is greater than theirs will ever be. Lexington and Concord called, and they disagree, because when the British shot at the U.S., they ran away. They were not so united at first.
I don't have anything to add for this moment, because I don't know where we are in history, and I don't know enough about them.
Bouncing all over. But yeah, so the concept of print being really important has a long-term effect. I like when I have a little more time for talking about long-term effects. This is a good one. This is a good one for this. Because, like I was saying, with Ben Franklin knowing these editors, The reason for this is Ben Franklin's one of his first jobs was as a guy who worked at a printing press.
Yes.
He carried type around all day. So he got, like, when he was young, Ben Franklin was this big, strong guy because he's just carrying 50 pounds of movable type with him everywhere he's going. And he's setting up these printing presses. Well, eventually he did well enough for himself. He bought a press. And then...
got someone else to move it around.
Yeah, and they got somebody else to move it around. And, well, then he started taking apprentices. And instead of charging them, which was the common thing of, you pay me this much money, I teach you this trade.
Okay.
He just said, come here and just stay in touch with me.
Oh, nice.
And we'll help you set up your own press.
Okay. Little information bartering.
So what he wound up doing is he seeded his apprentices, basically.
Okay.
He helped set them up all over because he wanted information. It wasn't like anything evil or despotic or like this. He had these plots. It was just, if I can help these people set up presses everywhere, then everybody has information. And a side perk is, as a super nosy guy, I can know everything that's going on whenever I want to.
Who doesn't want that?
Exactly. So he was like one of the first media moguls, as well as being the inventor of the stove and getting electrocuted by a key tied to a kite.
Not all experiments work out.
Now,
great.
I mean, it worked out. Don't let that happen again. Electricity sucks. Like, it's a dangerous beast. But yeah, so by using his concept of this press and then having a daily press, he was very capable of seeding out all of this information. So Americans were the proto-Americans, before we became a country. I wasn't here. But before the colonists were able to break free of England, they didn't have all of the information sometimes. But by setting up this press, you don't have to have one guy shouting, the British are coming. It takes them 2 weeks to get there from England. So
we can print that faster.
You can print and pass on information. Like if Washington is trying to move troops from here to there, and this place is already collapsed, well, he doesn't want to go there anymore. Well, the printing press lets that information get to him faster. Or people are holding out like, if New York falls, we lose our biggest port, we lose the war effort. New York held. Pass on the information to everybody.
Sure.
So that really helped them. And then it also helped say, we wrote this Declaration of Independence, and we would like every world leader to know about it. Print it. Also, Americans, here's your country now. Read about it.
Hey, so how do they print off the Declaration of the thing I've seen is a handwritten scrawly deal.
Yeah, so
that's not the one they printed off.
There's options for that. You do the classic woodcut.
Mm-hmm. So they recut.
So you cut the whole thing
in script,
like in script. Yep. Because when the original Declaration was made. They had a secretary who wrote it like 50 times. There were a lot of copies of these things. And there's the original text. I don't even know where you can find that now. But that's the one that like originally had clauses to ban slavery, and it's longer. And
funny how we lost that one.
Yep. Yeah.
Whoops.
Yeah, that was
real oopsie-daisy there.
That's we could talk about that someday. Maybe this 4th of July we'll talk about it.
Okay.
That would be good. But no, so... Yeah, that was an important document. This is a really important thing of having this printing presses, because you could hand carve an image of it. It was like taking a photograph.
Yeah, okay.
Just took a really long time. But these guys got really good at either tracing the design and then carving it, or doing it all just by eyesight.
Right.
Another version of it is much more common. Is they use movable type and just set it up, and it looks a little different. It's not as scrawly.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Is why isn't that one? I've not seen that. I don't think I've seen that.
That's because it's less popular of an image, but there was obviously lots more of them. But the fact that we have the original in the Library of Congress, and you can actually physically see the thing.
One of the originals, though. We don't even know that's the original.
It could be a copy of the original. But it was a handwritten copy by the guy who wrote the original.
Yeah, okay.
I believe it's the original.
Yeah.
It's allegedly the original. That's why it's behind like 6 inches of bulletproof glass, and if you try to take it, like, I think they...
Because no one's going to shoot our Constitution.
But yeah, so it's kind of a, well, is this the original or is this a copy of the they did keep really good records, though. Like that one, the original, like the original signatories and everything, I believe that's the one.
Yeah, I suppose the one that would be the board was the one they signed.
Yeah, the one they signed. They
Not
put
the
that.
first-
They put that
first
thing
drafts
like
that
an
he did.
iron case, probably, and like nobody touches this. And then they had somebody trace all of the signatures
Sure.
and copy everything. They might have had the guys sign multiples.
Okay.
That's very possible. That was a common thing.
We're
but
back to not knowing now.
it's
Great.
probably not as fancy, though, because there's
Okay.
that giant John Hancock in the middle of the first one.
Yeah, John, you want to do that nod on the second one? Let's pace it out a little better.
Reminds me of a great line in the play 1776. It's all about it. And John Hancock signs it, and they're like, that's a big hand, the signature. And he's like, it's a fat George can see it without his glasses. Ha, ha, ha. And then they all start bickering and goes, can everybody sign this? If the British come in now, my name's the only one on the damn thing. And they're like, oh, yeah, sorry.
Sure.
Sure. I would have expected everyone to just back up like, no, we agreed.
Yeah, one person to sign it is enough.
That's
So
enough.
that should be enough.
So then it evolves from, this movable type printing, which is the most efficient way to do it for the longest time. And we have some version of that, even through when we have, these massive presses with the big rollers on it.
Yeah.
It's the same concept. It just becomes more refined.
Okay.
And they have to move everything around. My father was a journalist for 40 or 50 years.
Huh.
Very, very long time. And he's talked extensively about like the evolution of the press and how it would go from what Miss Mallet did, which was kind of this locally run small business thing of this is the information and here's what's going on, to you get big companies buying them out. And you see it even back then. Bigger company buys her out. Well, that makes it less local every time you do it. It's less
Yes.
local. It's less, here's what happened in my part of London, and here's what's happening in all of London. Well, what's happening down Fleet Street? Well, go down Fleet Street.
Oh, sure. By their paper.
Right. So when I was a kid, we had like the Door County Press Gazette. That told you all the information that happened in Door County, where I come from, and that's all the towns. Also a Gazette. Or not the Door County Press Gazette. It was a Press Gazette because they bought it. Press Gazette bought it. But it was the Advocate. And it was saying, this is what we do.
Yes.
And they'd been around for quite some time. Well, then the Press Gazette bought it, the Green Bay Press Gazette, who are owned by Gannett News, and then they shut it down.
Oh.
Because why have a press? So they just made it online instead.
I imagine money.
Yes. Well, yeah. So they controlled it, and then everybody there lost their jobs. Awesome. And then they sold the equipment. Good job. And stripped it down, and now it's just online stuff. It's basically blogs. And the editing, you'll see nowadays, is less attentive. The wording is not as great.
More product.
Exactly.
Less people edit.
So yeah, now you've got this concept of the printing press has evolved into everybody has their own printing press. We get typewriters.
Sure, yeah.
Which is as movable of a type as you can possibly get.
Yeah.
And then with the digitalization of everything, everybody can be their own press correspondent. And it kind of dilutes the process of gathering all of this information, having like a professional do it, to everybody's an expert now.
Yes.
Instead of having like a plumber and a trained pipe fitter come into your home and fix your pipes, you do it.
Yeah.
And you don't even have a book on how to do it. And you've never done it before. So you just rip the whole thing apart.
You could YouTube video that.
No, this is without YouTubing. You don't get to even YouTube it.
Okay.
That's how this starts. You don't even YouTube. You just do. Well, it's chaos, right?
Sure.
And then eventually you do a YouTube video and it worked for you, but it doesn't work for him or her. Their house is totally different.
Yeah.
So it becomes very, like I said, diluted to the point where, you just got somebody tweeting 160, or is it 320 characters now they can do? I don't know. I don't Twitter.
A lot.
But now that's news.
Sure.
And everybody is like they were then. They're fixated on this. I need my fix. I need my information
More
now.
information. Yeah.
And the most current and fastest information is best. So it
Current
doesn't-
and fastest.
Yeah.
Not
most
right.
correct. Yes.
Interesting.
It doesn't have to be right. It just has to be who got the info out first. And then it's almost always colored with opinion. That's why you have to be very careful about, did this person say this is their opinion?
Sure.
Did this person say, well, this is stupid? Like, you have to read the language, and if it's negative or positive in either way, it's probably not just a neutral source.
Right.
And that's a key to journalism and the press, is
Being neutral.
being neutral. And it has foundations in the earliest versions of the press, where there was Elizabeth Mallet, where there was Johann Carolus, where they were just writing, here's what happened, set it down and run away, because it's like on fire.
Yeah.
Like, that's how you have to treat the news. You just say, this is what happened, and then you come up with your own opinion.
Yeah.
Okay? But if you say your opinion, that's no longer journalism, that's editorializing.
It's gotta be hard to do because You figure out your own opinion, and then they start figuring their own opinion. You're like,
that's not
the opinion I want you to have.
That's not really healthy.
I would prefer you have a different
I
opinion.
would prefer you not see, well, this is a trouble. Well, we should kill it. Oh, that's not why I gave you the information.
I would like to think that most opinion things, op-eds and that kind of stuff are from people going, the opinion you're coming up with is dangerous. Here's a safer opinion.
Yes. Yeah. Most op-eds, they take a little more time to write it out. And that's another thing, too. With this type of information back then, and I think this is why the way the flow of the press has changed so much, is the editorialization process took a long time. And it took a long time to gather the information, and it took a long time to gather the facts. So you had to go over everything thoroughly. You could read the same page 100 times while you're waiting for this other page to get through, while you're waiting for this other information, and then you can kind of corroborate all of it and go, okay, here's what's actually happening, and I can pick it apart. Whereas nowadays, you get one picture, but it's instant.
Yep.
And an immediate, a 30-second blip, and it could be the most innocuous speech ever, and then it can come off as awful if you took a 30-second blip of somebody saying this thing. Whereas at that time, where it's all written out, you have the whole speech. You had, like when Lincoln did the Gettysburg Address, they had the whole thing printed out and sent out to the world.
Nice.
It wasn't just, well, he said this. Well, no, we can see this is exactly what he said. He didn't just say, this is stupid. Nope, he said 7 years ago, and at all, the rest of it. And you could read the whole thing as one package. You had all the information in one spot. And it's interesting, like, how it evolved from a single flip sheet, or actually the Venetians are to blame for how a newspaper works.
Oh.
Because they wanted 4 pages to theirs, but they only wanted one piece of paper. So they just folded it in half, wrote on one side, opened it, wrote on the other side, wrote on the next side, wrote on the next side.
They did the same thing with blinds.
Yep, they're so good at this.
Will, you've used up an hour.
I've used up an hour. So that's it. That's the history of the press, from Elizabeth Mallet's daily newspaper evolving basically into Twitter storms. Unfortunate how far we've fallen.
Who knows what the next decades will bring.
And what is cool, though,
faster
is
news.
You can actually go to the Library of Congress and you can see, I think, every edition of her paper.
Oh.
They have them at the Library of Congress. They either have copies of the original Courant or actual pieces of it. It's very cool. You can find the images online. It's kind of hard to read because some of the print isn't the greatest, but it was very interesting to find all that.
That only lasted like 40 days, though.
That one only lasted 40 days. Well, her version of it.
Her version.
Then it got folded into another one, and then to another one, and into another one. But
Do they have all those copies?
I actually found the original. I sent you a picture of it. We're going to use it as our header, I think.
We'll put it right here.
Right here. It's the very first edition, March 11th, 1702, of the Daily Courant. And it's pretty awesome that we can have that information. Good job, England, for saving it. Yeah.
Well done.
There.
All right, Will, that's all the time we have.
That's it. That's it for today.
So that is the first edition of the Daily Courant.
Why it mattered, what it led to. Sad face.
Next week, we'll be discussing what, Will?
Next week, we're discussing Caligula.
Back to Rome.
We're going back to Rome. We're going to talk about the first emperor, or not the first emperor, the only emperor named Caligula. It's not his given name, but we'll explain all that.
Sure.
We're not going to talk too much about the movie that was made in the 70s.
Sexy.
But that's what it was made for. And we're going to figure out why he matters and who cares.
We'll find out.
We're going to find out.
Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe and comment on all the various
We had so much to comment on
tangents
today.
that we had today.
Yep.
And tell other people about this.
Yeah, even if you don't like it that much, like it anyway. And then send it to other people to like and subscribe. And then send it to the other people to like and subscribe.
What's the worst? Come on, we're trying to be a modern-day printing press.
Yeah, we're trying to pass on information with some funny conversational humor and not too many hardline opinions on anything.
We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.